In this video, let's learn about parameter constraint. So instead of talking about theory first in this lecture, I actually want to jump into Visual Studio and directly show you some examples. And then we are going to come to the theory part. All right, so let's go to Visual Studio and let's copy, let's say we're going to copy the first one. We're going to use map get endpoint, and we are going to use parameter here. So the first one is going to be ID, and then I'm gonna say I'm getting employee. Which employee? I'm getting the employee with ID. And of course I cannot just use ID here. I have to use context request root values ID. So I'm going to paste this over here and change. Okay, so that's the first endpoint, and I'm going to copy this and paste it just below it, and I'm going to create another, and this time I'm going to say name. So here, I'm going to say get employee, and then I'm going to spell out the name of the employee. All right, and I'm going to run it right now and see what's going to happen. The default one goes to the category, size, and ID. So let's go to use employees, and now I'm going to say 1, okay? Or whatever, you can say 10. Hit enter. Now we get an exception. And the exception is ambiguous match exception. The request matched multiple endpoints. And it actually tells you which one is having a problem. So obviously here we have a root template with 2 segments. First one is a literal segment, and the second one is a root parameter segment. And we have this endpoint also has 2 segments. First one is literal. The second one is a root parameter. And then it just happened to be that the first segments, the literal segment, are exactly the same between the two. The second segment, although the root parameter name are different, but the root parameter happen to show up at the same place, which is the second segment. So to ASP.NET Core, these 2 segments are no different when it comes to matching root templates. /employees/ID is going to be mapped to this one and this one. /employee/ let's say /Frank is also going to be mapped to this one and this one. Right? So let's actually give it a try here by specifying a name, let's say my name, and you're going to see that it says that this matches employee/ID and also employee/name, and also this one, right? Because it has an optional parameter at the end. So which one's supposed to be matched? We don't know. That's why we need a feature which we call parameter constraint. So here, this ID is supposed to be an integer. So how do I specify and say that this segment, although it is the second segment, has a parameter and it show up here, here, and also here, then I can say that this one has to be an integer. Okay, so I'm going to say integer. And what's the simple change? We're going to run it and see what happens. Go over here, and you can see that with /employee/Frank, it goes over here, and there's no problem. And if I say 10 or 220, it goes to here, and no problem. So this is what we call root parameter constraint. We're using a parameter constraint here to say that this particular root parameter is only of the type. So we're constraining the data that is provided to the segment. And in doing so, we're helping the root templates to be distinct. Because previously, they are not distinct. They are basically considered as duplicates. We have duplicate root templates and cannot be matched. Now, because I specified a constraint, therefore, this root template and this root template are now distinct. Because this one has to be integer and this one is going to be just a string. So that's the purpose of parameter constraint. Parameter constraint is used for the purpose of making root templates distinct. That's the main purpose. The second purpose is sometimes with the help of model binding. We're going to talk about the model binding in the next lecture. With the help of model binding, developers will get a parameter that is already of the type that is specified right here. We don't have to manually convert from a string type, because without specifying the type, everything that we got is going to be of string type. So that's, or just object, right? So that's not very convenient. And if you specify it to be integer, and then in model binding, you also specify it as integer, then you automatically receive that variable as integer value. So that's just a convenience, but the main purpose of having parameter constraint is to make the root template distinct. However, I would argue that if you design your root templates better, you can make it distinct without having to use a root parameter constraint. For example, this one, /employees/ID is fine. Here, /employees/name, you would first of all argue that this doesn't have to exist, right? Why do you have to use a name to get the employee? A name can be duplicates. Someone called Frank Liu, another person could be called Frank Liu as well. So this, first of all, shouldn't exist. And if it does exist, then you can use some literal part, for example, /employee/names, just for example. This will make the two root templates distinct. You don't need to get the help from defining a constraint, right? Although this doesn't make much sense, but I'm just showing you that if you design your root templates better, you can avoid having to use parameter constraint. Okay, but since this lecture is about root templates constraint, we are going to jump into browser and let's search root parameter constraint in ASP.NET Core. Right, and you're gonna see this is C#. So let's go into routing, and this is a big article, and let's search constraint, and we got constraint, and click on this root parameter constraint, and we're coming over here, close this. So you can see that we have these constraints over here available for us. And the first few are types, right? Integer, boolean, date type, decimal, double, float, GUI, long. So all of these can be used exactly like what I showed you. Right? ID is integer, active is boolean, right? You just use your parameter name first, followed by a colon, and then the parameter constraint itself. So all of these first few, this is first 8, are of the type constraints. And then the later ones, right, most of them are functions. So this is like to say that the string must be at least 4 characters when we do this. Maximum length, the length of the string again. So this is exactly, right? And you can actually apply multiple constraint. For example, if we say username, minimum length is 4, maximum length is 8, then you can say something like, let me bring up Notepad, okay? So here, let me copy this and paste it here. So we can say minimum length 4, and then add another colon, and we're gonna say maximum length, right? So max length 8, like this. You can combine multiple different constraints, and also you can use regular expressions over here. These are the different constraints you can use. Okay, so multiple ones, they're actually showing you, right? So ID is integer, but it has a minimum value. They have regular expressions, so you can read this article. I'm not going to demonstrate every single one of these different things. It's very easy to apply. Just remember, we use ID with a colon and then the constraint. And if you want to have multiple, you add another colon and add a constraint. And that's it. But what I really want to emphasize is that the constraint is not really necessary unless you didn't design your root template good enough. Okay? If you design it well, you can actually avoid using root template. But sometimes I do like using something like this so that it helps me with a model binding. When I use model binding, I will automatically get ID as integer. Another thing, very important thing, is that if this is not satisfied, let me remove the second one. Let's focus on this single one. So if I provide /employee/ABC, which doesn't satisfy this, it isn't matched to any other endpoints, then guess what's going to happen? It's not going to throw you an error. It's going to route you to the 404. So let me show you. Let's run the application. All right. So let's do /employees/ABC. And I hit enter. This, of course, is mapped to the categories one. Categories. So let me comment out this first and then run it again. All right. Let's do /employee/ABC. Now you can see that it goes to error 404. Right? If I change it to 1, then it goes to the correct endpoint. So as you can see, the root constraint is really helping you to map the request to the endpoint. But if it doesn't find the map, if the constraint is not satisfied, then it considers this as a resource that cannot be found on the server. So therefore, you cannot use this to validate user input. If you expect user to enter this part of the segment and then use constraint to validate it, then what really should happen is you spit out the error message saying, hey, this ID doesn't exist. But because this is part of the routing system, right? A routing system, when it doesn't find a match, what does it do? It gives you the 404 not found error. And this is confusing to the end user. The end user might be thinking, okay, I'm entering something wrong, or maybe I entered the URL wrong. It's just confusing. The user doesn't know which part is wrong. You should never use the constraint to validate user input. In fact, I would argue that you at least shouldn't allow the user to enter any information on the screen and then use that as part of the URL, because in that case, you really have to validate the user input. And if you validate the user input on the page itself, that's okay. But if you're relying on the constraint to validate it, doesn't make sense. Okay, that is what I want to talk about in this video. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, I will see you in the next one.